Hello. So, I've been thinking a lot about navigating crisis, which kind of makes sense because I've just been through, I think, what's pretty safe to say the most significant crisis or the biggest crisis of my own life. For those of you that are new, I recently lost a daughter. She passed away. She had congenital diaphragmatic hernia. That's a mouthful. That was diagnosed in utero. And so we knew for several weeks. She got diagnosed at 20 weeks. So we knew for another 20 weeks that she had this condition. And it ended up taking her life. And that was really unexpected. And now that happened. She was born in November of 2022. She passed on December 1st of 2022. At the time of this recording, it's February 28th of 2023. So it's been about 4 months since she passed. And to be completely honest, I'm kind of, just now coming back into kind of the world and getting back into my normal routines to the fullest capacity. And one of the things I've been thinking of and processing over the past several months is how to navigate this crisis. Because, honestly, to be completely honest, I just walked through something that no parent should have to walk through, right? Like, no parent should have to bury their child. Like, really, it is horrific. It is like the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And it was really a really challenging season. But I also can see how the Lord's used it and is using it and is continuing to use it. And it actually even gives me an expectancy to kind of like look forward to seeing how God continues to use it. And one of the things that I've been thinking about on the other side of kind of the really core, really messy part of the crisis, no longer being out of crisis mode and into kind of back to normal life mode while still grieving, is how to navigate that. Is kind of, I'm starting to look back and reflect on how did I navigate that without totally losing it. And not to say there weren't moments where I had emotional breakdowns, where I cried and was upset, of course, duh. But more of like what would I tell someone else going through this or who is about to embark on this? Because honestly, although the last year has in so many ways been the most challenging time of my life, it has also been caused some of the most significant growth. And I've been able to see how it's been used for me and for my good. And a lot of that was because of the mindset and attitude I chose to have and the hope I have in the Lord. And so I just really felt this week, as I was thinking about what to share with you today, that I wanted to share this. So I'm going to start a 3-part series because I really broke it down. I kind of broke down 3 elements or 3 sections of going through a crisis. We kind of have this mindset and preparation for a crisis. We have what to do in the middle of the crisis when you're in it, in the mess. And the post-crisis, kind of the reemergence into life after having gone through something incredibly traumatic. Because all 3 of these stages are really important. So there's going to be one video dedicated to each. So today we're going to be talking about the mindset and preparing for a crisis. Because the deal with a crisis is we all are going to go through them. Many of us already have gone through crisis. There's varying degrees of intensity of what a crisis can look like for each individual person and what you've gone through in your life. Everybody's gone through crises. And honestly, one of the guarantees of life is that you're going to go through at least one crisis, really intense crisis, at some point in your life. You could also call this a traumatic event, a challenging season, whatever you want to call it. But we're all going to go through it. Some of us already have. So what I want to share with you guys today is the crisis that I've been through in the last year started the day that I was sitting in the doctor's office and we had just had an ultrasound and the doctor came in and said that there was something wrong with my baby. And in that moment, I had a decision to make. But before I get to that, I want to talk about preparing, because if you're not in a crisis yet, if you're not currently in a crisis, awesome. That's great. Don't navigate away from this video though, because there's some tips, tricks, and tools that will help you prepare for a crisis, because you will experience a crisis at some point. Like, even Jesus said, right, that we can expect trials and tribulations, right? Jesus said that to expect trials and tribulations, but that we don't have to lose heart, for he has overcome the world. So in this world we will have trouble, but do not lose heart, for he has overcome the world. So what that means is we're gonna go through hard stuff, really hard stuff, traumatic stuff even. But we don't have to lose our joy, our faith, our peace in the process. And actually the process of going through those hard things can actually strengthen and increase our faith and our trust and our joy and our hope and our peace even. So I have a couple things I want to share with you about preparing for a crisis if you're not in a crisis at the moment. If you are in a crisis at the moment, listen to this anyway, because this is also like what to do if you're in a crisis and how to handle it in that kind of, whether it's at the beginning stage or wherever you are in a crisis, start here if you're wanting to know how to navigate it in a way that's going to lead to joy and peace. So, first off, like, what is a crisis? Crisis is kind of anything that is unexpected, traumatic, a really challenging situation. That's kind of the definition I'm going with. I'm not giving you a dictionary definition right now. I mean, I suppose I could, but right now the definition of what I'm kind of working with and what I'm saying when I say crisis, it's kind of this moment, this season, moment, time of something out of the normal, something incredibly challenging or difficult or traumatic that maybe even triggers some of our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses too. Okay. And there's a couple different types, but for what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about the two key points. There's two kind of key types that this is relevant for specifically. This is relevant to a lot of things, but I'm really applying this to crisis, right? Number one, we've got this, you have impending crises. Okay. Impending crises are things like a transition, like maybe you're going to move. That can be a crisis. That can be something that's traumatic or challenging. It can cause a crisis in you or in your children. Receiving some sort of a diagnosis, whether it's terminal or chronic, but knowing that has some sort of a time bound to it. Basically, an impending crisis is one that there's warning signs for. Kind of like, hey, you're starting to see this is there's some sort of crisis kind of on the horizon. And this can be on the micro level of your personal life or the macro level of the world. The COVID-19 pandemic was a crisis. Wars are crisis situations, right? Those are, and I would say COVID-19 was like a unexpected crisis. An impending crisis, though, sometimes like a war can be more of an impending crisis where you kind of see warning signs leading up to it, right? If you're paying attention. So that's kind of what an impending crisis could be. So, and I'll give the example. A really good example for this could be things like illnesses, especially chronic illnesses. So like if you have a chronic illness or someone you know has a chronic illness, someone in your family, or like the situation I just walked through in the last year of my baby having a condition, a congenital defect. There wasn't a crisis in that moment, meaning she was fine while I was pregnant. Like there was no need, like she was still alive, she was still active, she was fine while I was pregnant. The danger was going to be once she was born of can she survive on her own without my body supporting hers. And for example, okay, so this could be, or it could be a chronic condition like some sort of a long-term illness. It could even be like a cancer diagnosis where it's like, crisis, there's all this health stuff to go through, but you're not like dying right this minute. There's things you can do. Does that make sense? So there's impending. But then there's the unexpected, and this is more what we associate with a crisis. This is the didn't see it coming. A car crash, a natural disaster, a sudden illness, a sudden death, something that happens quickly, that we were not at all prepared for. And a lot of times, this is the most common crisis. So regardless of what type of crisis you're looking at and facing, one of the things that can be helpful about an impending crisis, if that's what you're kind of looking at, is it gives you a little bit of time to like plan and prepare. But not always. The unexpected crisis, you really are not prepared for unless you've maybe done some of this work already, some of making some of these decisions and figuring some of these things out, just as kind of like a emergency preparedness plan, right? People have emergency preparedness plans for natural disasters or things like that, right? It's possible to have an emergency preparedness plan kind of for your life. Like, what happens if, and this is not to go into anxiousness. Don't go down anxiety road, okay? And been there, done that. Don't do that. And if that's something you're struggling with, please let me know. I'm happy to support you with that, because I struggled with anxiety for like over 10 years. And it was through coaching and learning how to manage my thoughts that I was able to break free of anxiety. So I'm not talking about like inducing anxiety in yourself, but there is a way where you can kind of explore some what if scenarios in order to prepare yourself so that when you do face an inevitable crisis, even if it's not the specific thing that you are worried about, you can face it feeling somewhat prepared. So ultimately though, what do we do when a crisis hits? Okay, we've kind of already established crisis is going to happen. Crisis is going to happen. You're going to have a crisis at some point or another. How do we handle this? One of the things that you can do to prepare. What do we do to prepare for a crisis? So if you're not in a crisis mode right now, you're not in a survival mode, you're not in a crisis mode, start preparing yourself by learning how to manage your thoughts now. There are lots of tools out there. If that's something you're interested in, I can share some of those with you. I have a tool on my website called the Thought Formula, and I'm actually going to be working on that in the next month to revamp it and relaunch it as a free download. But there's lots of things you can do. There's lots of resources out there to help you learn to manage your thoughts. And that's also something that I'll talk about more and more in the coming weeks. But learning to manage your thoughts, and this isn't stuffing. This isn't ignoring your thoughts or stuffing them or judging them. It's acknowledging them, acknowledging what's called, what my coach calls, kind of the formula, where you acknowledge that you have a thought triggers a feeling, that feeling triggers your actions, and your actions are what create your results. And so if you can learn to manage your thoughts, that then leads to you being able to manage your emotions, which then leads to choices that are more in line with your ultimate goals and results that are in line with your ultimate goals. Okay. So if you're not in crisis mode right now, if you're not in survival mode, what you can do to prepare for whatever inevitable crisis is going to happen at some point in your life is to start now to learn how to manage your thoughts. By the way, for those Christians out there, this is biblical, right? And God talks about, I'm forgetting the exact chapter verse, but I believe it was an epistle written by Paul. But there's several places in the Bible that talks about renewing your mind, right? That we take our thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ. It also talks about renewing our mind so that we're not conformed to the patterns of this world. That's what managing your thoughts is. And that's what this formula can do. So that's kind of the how to prepare at any point. But let's say crisis hits. Crisis has hit. You've gotten a diagnosis, car crash, natural disaster, whatever it is. You lost your job. There's a crisis. What do you do? You have a decision to make. The very first thing, basically, what you decide to do when that crisis hits is going to set the tone for how you go through that crisis and how you experience that crisis. Because believe it or not, and this might be really hard to believe, circumstances are neutral. They're neutral. What gives them meaning, what gives them weight, is what we believe about the circumstances. For one person, losing their job could be absolutely devastating because there's the belief that I'm not going to get another job. I needed that job. I don't have a emergency fund. What am I going to do? For another person, losing their job is like a ticket to freedom because they hated that job anyway and they have a plan B already and they're just excited to move on to something else. Right? Or somewhere in between. Same circumstance, different attitude about it. So what gives meaning to the circumstance is how we interpret it. This is really important when it comes to a crisis. Because this isn't to downplay the crisis and that something horrific can sometimes happen. But you get to choose your attitude in that. And you can acknowledge that it's hard and it sucks, while still choosing an attitude that enables you to and empowers you to grow and to walk through it in peace. So you choose your attitude. That's the very first thing you do. You sit down and you decide, what's my attitude going to be in this? And by the way, if you're in the middle of a crisis, and let's say you've been experiencing a crisis for a little bit and you haven't walked through this, this can start at any point. This could be at the middle point of the crisis. Like if you didn't know to do this, right? So if you didn't do it right away, don't think you missed the boat. When you're hearing this, if you're in a crisis, do this, okay? Choose your attitude. Are you going to be a victim or are you going to take ownership? Okay? I love, if anybody who knows me in real life, and you'll know me real well about this, I love Lord of the Rings. Tolkien is my favorite author. I actually specialized in him in college, and my senior thesis, getting my bachelor's degree, was a 30-page paper on Tolkien. Absolutely love Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, all his writing. He has a quote, there's a quote, a scene in The Fellowship of the Ring. If you're not familiar with it, go watch it. It's in the movie and it's in the books, or go read it. But it's kind of towards the beginning, but it's when Frodo has learned that this ring that he inherited from his uncle Bilbo is actually this cursed object, basically this magical ring of power that is needs to be destroyed. Otherwise, darkness will overtake the world. Okay. And, it's later, actually. Anyway, point being, it's in the Fellowship of the Ring. Actually, I think it's in the Mines of Moria, but whatever. And he's having this conversation, but Frodo's just carrying the weight of this ring that needs to be destroyed and feeling the burden. It is a burden, and it's stressful because pretty much the entire weight of will good or evil win rides on his success and his mission. Like, it's up to him and his success. If he succeeds, then darkness will lose and the good will win. If he fails, everything he knows and loves and values will be utterly destroyed. So he's sitting there and he's feeling the weight of that responsibility and that crisis, right? Talk about a crisis. And he says, I wish the ring had never come to me. Like, I wish I never had to go through this, and I wish I didn't have to see this. And the ring didn't come to me. And Gandalf says to him, Gandalf, his mentor, says to him, so do all who live to see such times. But that's not for them to decide. All that we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. So I love this quote because it's so applicable to any crisis because we don't get to decide the circumstances necessarily. We're not in control of the world. God is. God is sovereign. He ultimately is in control. Additionally, the world is full of people who have free will and make decisions that have consequences that ripple out beyond them. And so things happen to us sometimes that we did not expect, that we had absolutely no control over. Or things happen in our life. There are circumstances we face that we had we can't change it. We don't get to control or change the circumstance necessarily, but we can control our thoughts and our attitude about the circumstance, and that is the key to how we experience it. See, we could be a victim. A victim has this belief that whatever it is happening to me, right? This is happening to me. I'm helpless. I'm stuck. Victim can also sometimes get bitter, blaming other people. Like, you did this to me, you horrible person, blah, blah, blah. But a victim attitude is get stuck in a woe is me mentality, often can lead to depression, depending on the type of circumstance, the type of crisis you're facing. And it really just, that's what the victim is. The victim, but really ultimately it's really defined by like the idea that whatever is going on is happening to me. Okay? Taking ownership. This doesn't mean that you blame yourself. Okay, ownership is not blaming yourself. Ownership, though, is stepping into a slightly more neutral or even curious mode of, this happened. This is what's happening. I'm going to trust and believe that it's happening for me, even if I can't see what that is yet. I'm going to be curious. What can I learn in this situation? I'm going to trust the Lord that He has this all worked out, and I'm just going to take the next right step. That's ownership. And it's ownership of your thoughts and your emotion and how you show up. A victim shows up blaming other people, blaming the circumstance, and wallowing in the suck. Okay? Oh, someone who is in ownership looks at and finds the areas where he or she can stand confidently and say, okay, yeah, I can't control that, so I'm going to just release it. I can't control that. I'm going to release it and trust the Lord with that outcome. And I'm going to just focus here on what I know is my responsibility. So the first thing to do is decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to be a victim, or are you going to walk in ownership? Once you've made that decision, you then also get to decide, how are you going to come out of this season? You get to make the decision of how you are going to navigate this crisis and how you're going to come out. You might not know what the ultimate outcome of the crisis is. Okay, but you get to make the decision of what kind of person am I going to be on the other side. Okay? I'm going to use the example of the crisis I just walked through to kind of give you a model, like an example, right? So the crisis that I just walked through I'm going to kind of go back to the beginning, right? When I first received heard the diagnosis that my daughter had a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and that it was a serious life-threatening condition. I had a choice to make right then. I could get into victim of like, why is this happening, and freak out. Or I could decide to trust the Lord and say, no, illness doesn't come from God, right? So I'm not blaming God, right? Either. Victims blame God. A victim blaming God and going like, God did this, that would still be victim, by the way. Ownership would be more of, God knows what's happening. He's holding me. His heart is just as broken over the whatever caused this. His heart and his desire is for healing and wholeness. I'm going to trust him that he's got the outcome and that he is going to orchestrate and lead me and my husband and everyone involved in this situation to make the choices that end up creating the ultimate good for our lives and God's glory. I'm going to trust that. That was stepping into ownership. Additionally, stepping into ownership looked like, I'm going to take the next right step. Okay, I'm going to schedule the next doctor's appointment. I'm going to do everything I can to support my daughter and to give her every chance of living possible. I'm not going to give up on her. I'm going to keep fighting for her until she's done. That's what ownership looked like there. Then looking at deciding how you're going to come out of this season. This is a decision I made with my husband as well. I mean, I made it myself for me personally, and then my husband and I sat down and made this decision together as how we were going to navigate this as a family. You get to decide when you're assessing, like, how am I going to come out of this season? What kind of person am I going to be? Am I going to let this situation make me bitter? By the way, victims become bitter, usually. Or am I going to let it allow it to help me become better, help me grow? You decide that. And so what that looked like for me was taking it to the Lord and saying, Lord, I trust you. Lord, help continue sensitize my spirit, sensitize my heart to see whatever it is that you want to show me in this season. Help me to grow. Help me to lean on you and rely on you and trust on you, and open my eyes to where you want me to grow and what I need to work on and how I need to grow through this season. Okay. What it looked like in deciding for our family, as a family dynamic, my husband and I sat down and we said, walking through really challenging crises, they can tear families and marriages apart. Statistically, by the way, walking through the loss of a child, I think the statistic was something like it increases the odds of divorce by like 70%, I believe was when I was looking at it. 50 to 70% increases after the risk increases. And we did not have any inkling that our daughter was actually going to pass. We really didn't think we thought she was going to make it. It wasn't until like the week she died that we were like, oh, this is actually much more serious. Like, we thought that it was just a simple kind of repair surgery and then she'll be fine. It didn't really kind of hit us or sink in, or, and then the doctors were also very optimistic. So it wasn't that we were like expecting her to pass, but there was a moment where we sat down and had to kind of assess, like, how are we going to come out of this as a family? We can go through this and lash out at each other and go in victim mode and it'll tear our family apart. Or we can commit right now that no matter what the outcome is, we are going to trust the Lord, and we're going to lean on each other, communicate, and walk through this together, and have it let it be a catalyst that causes us to draw closer together as a couple and closer together as a family. And we decided, we committed that to each other and invited the Lord into that commitment too, to say, Lord, like, we want this, whatever the outcome, to draw us closer to each other and to you, both, again, as a couple and as a family. And that was a decision. That didn't just happen. And we're still walking through that. We're still navigating that. But it has, even in the past even though it's only been 3 months, I can tell you, like, significant changes. And I'll share that story eventually, probably. But right now, what I want to share with you is it was a decision. It didn't just happen. And here's the deal, is that it's making that proactive choice, and it's managing our thoughts. This is how we navigate a crisis. And the most peaceful path is to do this, make these decisions at the beginning, like when the crisis hits, when it starts. But let's say if you're walking through a crisis and you've been walking through a crisis for several weeks or even several months, it's not too late. You can make that decision now. You can, if you've been walking in victim mode, you can decide, you know what? I recognize I've been walking in victim mode in this. No more. I'm going to start taking ownership. Okay, I've been letting this let me be bitter. This has been causing bitterness. This has been causing stress. No more. I'm going to invite the Lord into this and ask him to help refine me and have this be a catalyst for me to become better. It's your choice. It really is. And because ultimately, you don't get to decide if you get knocked down, right? You don't get to decide if you're going to get knocked down by circumstances. But you have 100% control over whether the thing that knocked you down knocks you out of the game. That's your choice. You get knocked down, you're gonna get knocked down. It's gonna happen. Probably gonna happen multiple times in your life. You get to decide if you are gonna let it knock you out completely. By the way, that's what Satan wants. That's what the enemy wants. He wants to knock you out completely. He wants to steal your peace. He wants to steal your joy. He wants to cause you to live in a state of stress, of victim, of bitterness, so that you're not effective for the kingdom. Because the person who's the most effective for the kingdom is someone who's living in the peace and the joy of the Lord no matter what circumstance they're going through. Because all glory for that goes to God. Somebody walking through something horrific, whether it's the death of a loved one or a scary diagnosis or the loss of a job or a natural disaster, whatever it is, someone walking through that doesn't naturally just have a whole lot of joy and peace. Nobody's going like, yeah, that person died. Yeah, I was in a car crash. It was awesome. Like, no one in their right mind feels that way. But as Christians, we can walk through that circumstance and say, I still have joy. I'm still going to find joy. I'm still going to find things to laugh at. I'm still going to walk in peace and love and be kind to those around me. And on the other end of it, look back and see and find and see the ways that God used it. So that's the first step in navigating a crisis, is really setting your mind to the task of choosing peace and joy. And that only comes from the Lord. That only comes from the Lord. And so really the other thing to do is, that I probably should have said first, honestly, is invite the Lord into it. And I'm going to talk more about that next week when I'm talking about what to do in the middle of the crisis and the mess and the messy and the suck. I'll talk about that next week. But today I want to share with you in the kind of the summary of, you choose your attitude, you choose how you're going to come out of this on the other side, like what kind of a person you're going to be. Are you going to be bitter or are you going to be better? But all of that hinges on, are you going to let the Lord in? Because Romans tells us, in Romans it tells us that we know that that God works out all things for the good, for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. So if you love God, if you surrendered your life to him, if you're a Christian and you love the Lord, you have that promise that he is going to work out everything you go through to your good, to be for your good and his glory. And do you trust that? Really, that's the decision you also have to make. Are you going to trust God's promise that he's going to work everything out for your good? If you trust that promise, then step into ownership, choose to become better, and invite him in. Invite him into that crisis. And that doesn't mean you have to be like perfect, happy Christian all the time. That's not what this looks like. You can still be operating in the peace and joy of the Lord and trusting in him while you are ugly, crying, cannot breathe, collapsed on the floor because it just hurts that bad. I've done that several times in the past 3 months. But even in that, it wasn't hopeless. It was, this hurts and this sucks. But I trust God. And that's entirely him. That's all him working. But you have to invite him in. He isn't going to force himself in and be like, here, have joy. Here, have peace. It's right there. He's standing in front of you, holding a platter, saying, here it is. You have to take it and receive it. And so the first step, the first part of navigating a crisis season is doing that. It's making that choice to invite the Lord in, to step into ownership, and to choose to let him use it to make you a better person. So I hope this was encouraging and helpful. This is kind of some of the things that I've learned in the last year. And I just felt led to share this with you. If this was a blessing to you and you learned something and you found it helpful, please give me a like, hit subscribe. Maybe share with me in the comments what you found helpful. And if you have any questions, please ask those in the comments as well. I do come back to the comments and engage there too. If you know somebody who would be blessed by this or encouraged by this, please share it. And I will see you all next time with part 2. We're going to be talking about the next step of what being in the middle and the mess and the suck crap looks like and how to navigate that. All right. Have a great night. Bye.